Welcome to the Mindset Podcast. We got a good one for you. I think I took it from Family Feud right now. Anywho, obviously excited to have Danial Mohammad here with us today.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks again. So I'm going to be very boring. I'm going to read, just because you're a senior engineer and you're probably very pragmatic. So I have to read the code. Danial Mohammad is a lead developer at SetSchedule. He manages international teams of contractors to complete design and development project, ensuring deadlines are met. He also works closely with C-level executive to make sure that the development team and new technologies are aligned with the business overall goals and vision.
Sounds about right.
Okay. So now in your own words, tell us about yourself.
So what I do basically is manage the whole development team. We have a whole team of contractors that we work with. They're kind of spread across the globe. Mm-hmm. Has its own challenges. Everyone's in different time zone. Everyone has different personalities. But just making sure everyone gets everything done, managing deadlines, projects, all that fun stuff.
Fun stuff. So let's rewind.
Sure.
Why engineering? How did you get into this?
Actually, I started kind of in high school. I was very into gaming at the time. I ended up building a computer for one of my birthdays, basically. At that point, I kind of got into computers, got into hardware, and then from there, I kind of moved into software. Mm-hmm. Figured I was going to do some stuff with computers at some point for college, whether it was IT or programming, probably one of the two. I actually worked an IT job in high school and actually throughout most of college. And that's kind of where I decided programming was it. I took some courses for programming and definitely decided that was my path.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So when you got into that path, or you made a decision you want to get into engineering, coding, why specifically back-end or...
Actually, that's not what my main focus was. When I applied here, I had almost no experience with the coding languages I'm actually using now. Mm-hmm. But I kind of just picked it up very quickly. I do a lot of learning on my own, and that's probably one of the best ways for me to learn, kind of just trying things out, making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
And that's interesting. That's interesting. Let's zoom in on this. Right here is SetSchedule.
Yes. And
here is you coming into SetSchedule as just an engineer, right? You're part of a Scrum team that had Apple engineer, Android, back-end, front-end. Well, you came from the back-end, and you accelerated your path to lead engineer, and you've learned everything, not knowing anything when you came in.
Yep.
So the company kind of bet on you, but I think for the purpose of mindset conversation, it's pretty interesting to me to kind of hear your story. Why did you kind of jump into the pool, and what kind of challenges you had to deal with when you decided to do that?
I kind of started off with more of C++ and whatnot, which is something that doesn't have as many job opportunities. So I also kind of started expanding what I was applying to, and I applied here, which was a .NET position, C#. For anyone who actually is aware of this stuff, I'm sure most people watching would not be.
Extremely interesting, though. Extremely interesting.
So I started applying for that type of positions. A lot of them ended up being kind of back-end roles, and I kind of just jumped into it. Figured that would be probably one of my best choices in terms of career path and growth. There's a lot more opportunity there. So I started applying to that. I ended up here. Actually, the interview process here is extremely difficult. First step was actually taking a C# test. I went into it with about 15 minutes of research on my own and apparently did well enough to move through it. So
okay,
yeah.
so all right. So you jumped in and you basically learned the code, if you will, or the language, right? And you were able to pass assessment. You were able to fake it till you make it. You jumped in and you started to build it, and obviously you've done it successfully, as I can attest to that, right? But what was your biggest hurdle then? That's really interesting to me. I mean, not knowing the language, right, or not having experience in coding, and jumping into it, able to fake it till you make it, and actually produce a product successfully. I'm curious to hear about like a major hurdle that you had and how you overcame it.
So I mean, kind of starting off when I was coding, in C# and working on the back end. My code wasn't the greatest, and as I kept working on it, I kind of kept improving. And I would say my hardest or the biggest challenge for me was kind of figuring out how to do certain things, how to do it better, just to keep learning from it. And obviously that's how I ended up here, how I ended up improving and kind of getting out of the beginner phase. It was my first full-time programming job out of college as well. So there was a lot of things to learn, a lot of improvements to be made. And I guess that's more of the difficult part, was just figuring out how to constantly improve, because I am always critical of my own work. So starting off, I look back at some of the code and it's like, what was I doing at that point? There's a lot of stuff you can improve. Coding can constantly be improved. It can constantly be more efficient. So just trying to figure out how to do that while moving forward and not slowing down too much is probably the biggest challenge. In general, once you learn a lot of concepts of programming, applying it to another language is not necessarily the most difficult, but definitely improving and constantly trying to improve is the tougher part for me, at least.
Okay. So jumping to the next segment of your career, if you will, right? I mean, you've done well, and now you're tasked with the responsibility of building a Scrum team, or basically building a development team that works as a cohesive unit to release a product. What are the challenges in that?
Biggest challenge for me is everyone being so spread out. Since it's basically a virtual team, getting everyone to communicate, feel like a team is probably going to be the hardest challenge. Well, it is the hardest challenge. Making sure everyone can attend all the meetings we have, the Scrum meetings we have, since everyone's on different time zones. That is extremely difficult. Everyone does...
Let's frame it. Let's frame it a little bit, right? Better. So for this business person that listens to it and has the aspiration to roll out an app, right? I mean, I want to start an app that, I don't know, sells movie tickets, right?
Right.
And from my personal experience, you have to go through a generational nightmare, right? Going through either service providers, third-party development companies, contractors, employees, etc. Right? And everything has its own friction point.
Sure.
What I'm curious to deliver, what I'd love to deliver to anyone who listens to this, is what would be your advice, kind of, right, when it comes to building a team, knowing that you're probably going to be a well-distributed team, because inherently talent, especially when it comes to coding, is well spread, right?
Sure.
So what would be your key advice, which obviously relates to the challenges, right?
Sure. I mean, just have to find the right people, honestly, which is something we've been trying to do for a long time. We're still working on it. We're still trying to constantly find more people. But finding the right people is probably the most important aspect of it. People who are willing to communicate, who are actually efficient with coding, willing to listen, and people who can constantly meet their deadlines.
How do you judge a coder engineer in terms of efficiency? How do you know if they're efficient with their code?
For me, as someone who can review the code, that's what I tend to do. Even if you don't know all the programming languages, you can still kind of follow the different types of the different languages. You can see how they code and in what way, and you can always just see the end result. If you're not that technical, you can see the end result, how often they how often there are bugs, how often they fail to deliver. You can judge a lot based off just that.
Do you have the ability, even though you don't know all of the languages, right? All of the, and you didn't code all of them, right? I mean, is there a way for you to be an efficient manager, working with all of these coders?
Sure. I mean, even if I don't work on it, I can still understand it, like I just explained. One example of that was we had an issue with our Android app, and our Android dev was having issues identifying the problem. I went in and actually fixed it, having zero Android development experience. So being able to jump in and do that sort of thing always is helpful. But yeah, I can review everyone's code. I can kind of see, at least in general terms, what they're moving towards, how their progress is going, things like that.
Okay. Let's put a spin on it. I'm going to college now, and I know there's this hype of, hey, I want to be a coder, right? Because it's just cool. What would be your piece of advice to that kind of guy, to the kid that goes to college? Not a kid, but the adult that goes to college.
I mean, there are going to be some tough parts. Just stick with it if you enjoy it. and I would say you really have to enjoy it to make it a career and to actually excel at that career. If you're not going to enjoy it, if you don't enjoy coding, it's what you're going to be doing the vast majority of your time unless you get into a bunch of meetings. So you really have to enjoy it. You have to be motivated and willing to constantly learn and improve.
Okay, so let's break it down to the psychoanalysis. What do you mean enjoy it? Just give the ugly and the dirt as it relates to coding, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to enjoy coding?
I mean, just generally enjoy working on it, but in the sense of you won't get too frustrated if you run into issues. Because I know some coders who, they're good coders, but when they run into an issue that they can't solve, they get very, very frustrated. And once you get frustrated, you tend to not be as analytical, or you're not going to be able to find the issue and resolve it as easily. So you have to be able to manage all sorts of aspects of it, because there are issues where you'll run into something where it's working fine and all of a sudden it just stops working. You have to be able to really analyze that situation. You have to be able to go through it, identify what the issue is and resolve it kind of as quickly as possible. I mean, we've had plenty of those issues here where you have to just have a quick turnaround and be able to fix it and not get too frustrated with it itself.
Okay, got it. I think you also had some health issues because of coding, no? I mean, you're using your wrists, right?
Yeah. That is one that I've had issues with for sure. Yeah, you got to make sure you do your hand exercises, wrist exercises, stretches, all that good stuff.
Wow. Okay. Well, that to me, that's a commitment. That's something. You know, I think that a lot of people go after the glamour, right? The mindset is, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be a coder. I want to be a business owner. I want to be, but at the end of the day, you need to be okay to do your wrist exercises, because you're going to put 20 hours a day just to hit deadlines, right? And all of a sudden, you cannot move your hand, right? I mean, that's the level of, I don't want to call it obsession. I use that term all the time, but that's the level of commitment that you really need to make towards your goal, because it's easy to want. It's really difficult to get it done and to do what you need to do in order to achieve your wants and needs, right? We talked about the college, the sophomore or whatever, guy that was looking to get into coding, or, and want to get into, and hopefully they actually know what they're doing, and hopefully they're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah.
But I would ask, I know that you're biased, but what would be a second, very kind of like surgical advice? Where would you recommend them to focus on? Knowing the world, knowing the employment world, I mean the employment world, right? The opportunities. What would you say to that guy in terms of maybe you want to choose this path specifically?
Depends on what you enjoy. Really, because there's so many different aspects and paths you can take for development. I know some people who like to work on front-end systems like websites. There's types of people like me who prefer to do back-end business logic. It really depends on what you enjoy working on and kind of going towards that. What you end up working on or what you enjoy will limit kind of your path for growth sometimes. Working in the back end, you deal specifically with business logic, which can help you advance quicker. At least in my case, that was the case, because obviously as you deal with business logic, you have to be involved with more meetings. You have to kind of know everything about the system. So you kind of learn and grow a little bit quicker in terms of the company. Whereas if you're just building a website for a company, you're kind of just following a little bit more of instructions, just kind of trying to build it out, make it look nice. That's my take on it. I'm sure it is definitely biased, but...
No, I would probably say that, well, I guess it's maybe not true to say, but you're the introvert coder, right? Because you want to be behind the scene, you want to build the business logic, the brain, the database, and then if you're an extrovert coder, right, you want to see, and, I mean, I wouldn't call it vain, but you want to see the results like on a screen, right, or on an iPhone, right? So I mean, I'm just kind of like trying to figure out kind of like the psychoanalysis, right?
Sure.
I mean, if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm saying, well, first off, as an entrepreneur, I want to build a Scrum team, or I want to build a development team, right? And if I'm a college, or high school graduate, right, and I really want to get into engineering, I mean, I would want to give a better advice as to like the type of person that would maybe be a better fit to a specific position. I mean, just a thought. I know.
Not too sure about that, honestly, because I've seen different personalities work in the same field, basically. But it kind of just ends up, yeah, I really think it ends up being going what you enjoy, going with what you enjoy doing, because that's in the long term what you're going to have to do, obviously. And there was actually some studies about it, and a lot of coders kind of burn out, and it has a really high rate of people burning out and switching to a different career path. I believe it's like around the age of 40, because there's so much constant learning. You tend to work long hours, and you're constantly pushing, and it's mentally taxing as well. So that's why I'm really stressing the whole enjoy what you do thing. Otherwise, you may hit that point where you do burn out, and then you have to decide what you want to do from there. Some people end up going kind of towards IT. Some people move, I don't know. There's just a lot of burnout situations with this field.
What is your philosophy, talking about this and leveraging on this, right? There's some philosophy or thought process that engineering and coding will be overly saturated in 20 years from now. And again, when you pick your career path and you say, I want this because it sounds great now, but do you think, or do you agree with that statement? Do you think that 20 years from now it'll be a highly concentrated, almost like, well-known professions? I mean, whether it's the legal community, whether it's medical, whether it's highly concentrated in profession that will obviously in turn would dilute or reduce the value, if you will, for some of the engineers. I
don't know if that's necessarily going to happen, because as of right now, our dependence on technology constantly is increasing. You have automations being built out now. You have everyone wanting to build their own softwares, and there's kind of a need for more and more developers. Who knows how 20 years will go? But I think there's still going to be a need, and the need for developers is constantly going to be growing, especially the need for competent developers who can actually not run into too many issues, who can kind of meet their deadlines, and just have a general understanding of how everything works.
So let's flip the switch and talk about the businesses. What's your philosophy regarding that? Where do you think businesses are going to be 20 years from now as it pertains to technology and innovation?
Everyone's going to have their own software. It depends on what you do, I guess. But everything is done through the web at this point. Everything is phasing out otherwise, or is less commonly used, especially with the newer generation. The newer generation prefers to do things over email, text, or online. They prefer not to get on the phone and make a call. So it's going to be a lot to do with automations, websites, everything with that, really.
So do you agree or disagree, though, with the contrarian approach of 20 years from now, people are going to be so sick from not talking to people and not doing things with people and getting everything so wiki-fest on Amazon or other platforms that they'll say, I want to go to the store and feel the fabric. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I don't think that's going to happen in 20 years. Maybe further out.
You think so?
Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen that quickly.
Okay.
It's possible, but yeah, not too sure about that one.
Okay. So what do you think, roadmapping, what do you think would happen in terms of technology in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years?
I mean, it's going to keep going the way it has, where everything is going to have apps, everything is going to be available kind of from your phone. I mean, now we're already reaching Amazon Fresh and grocery stores having their own deliveries. So you're going to do most of your shopping online. People will still, in 10 years, I think people will still have the preference of going to a store for things like clothes. Trying things on, seeing how it fits, how it feels. But for a lot of things like groceries, people are going to kind of figure out what they want and start moving towards having it delivered to them.
Okay. So we'll go with the flow in your approach, right? So you think there'll be more and more and more and more technology.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, is going to be the next big thing in tech?
Ooh, that one I have not thought too much about.
Now, don't give up anything proprietary.
That one I have not thought too much about.
Okay, so let's start thinking. That's the idea behind it.
Next big thing is going to be self-driving cars. Within 10 or 20 years, I really think that's going to take off. I mean, obviously, actually, every major car company is basically working on it at this point, whether they have a model available that has it like Tesla or not. And I think within 10, 20 years, that's really going to start becoming more prevalent. And you're going to see a lot more of those cars actually on the road.
I agree with that, actually.
I think that's the next major technology advance.
What's your take on AR VR?
It has its applications, but I don't think it's going to take off that soon. I mean, it has its applications, especially in terms of like the medical field where people are using it, where people need hands-on experience, but it's hard to get it. It has really high success rate for things like that and training in those aspects, but I don't necessarily know if it's going to take off that much. It's starting to take off a little bit in terms of gaming, a little bit for other things, but it's really not solidified its hold yet.
Why do you think that is? Because it's interesting. Because Zuckerberg at the beginning of the decade, right, in 2020, just said that Facebook is going to put a major push on AR VR because that's their decade, the path for this decade. So why do you think that's wrong?
It's a really high barrier to entry right now. Hardware cost is too high, basically, and that's the major thing. Because to buy a good VR headset, it's what, like $1,000. To have a computer that supports that, it's going to be another $2,000. Most people aren't willing to shell that out.
But wasn't that the case with computers in the 80s,
that's
70s,
true.
90s?
I mean, that is true. But recently we've seen hardware, it's really not gone down in price. High-end hardware probably it's been pretty stable, actually. If you want top-of-the-line hardware, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars for a computer. Like a graphics card that's high-end will cost you $1,000. High-end CPU. $1,000 plus. Actually, you could probably get it lower nowadays. So it is decreasing, but it's not decreasing, and there's not too many advances that are dropping the prices dramatically. And until that happens, I don't think VR is going to be as commonly used.
Okay, got it. Let's go to let's talk about project management a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, so obviously, innovation requires planning, right?
Yeah.
And development. And how do you, just trying to figure out how to articulate it, right? I mean, I'm an entrepreneur now and I want to build a mobile app. I mean, I guess, where do I start and how do I actually create a framework to be successful in rolling out a new project?
Sure. I mean, I guess the first step is really figuring out what you want, figuring out what you want your mobile app to do. At least have general guidelines for that before you jump into trying to find a team to build something out. You need to have an idea of what you want to accomplish with it, some of the goals of it, some maybe functionality, and kind of move forward from there. A lot of the times people will build out a basic document of what they want. Like, we want our users to be able to purchase from our store, see the updates for shipping, just random things I'm coming up with off the top of my head. But you have to have general guidelines of what you want your app to do. From there, you'd have to obviously try to plan out a bit, budget, whatnot, and then find a team that can actually accomplish the goal.
So let's talk about a team, because I know that I personally was clueless when we got into the space, right? When we started and built everything that we built, right?
Sure.
We made plenty of mistakes, right? With the entrepreneur in mind that never rolled out a mobile app, right? That has this brilliant idea, and the idea requires to have an app on all platforms, Android, let's say Apple and others, and needs to be able to take money, needs to be able to obviously manage subscriptions. Where do I start when it comes to developing?
Design, I guess. You have to kind of design what you want it to do. Obviously, I kind of talked about figuring out what you want it to do, but you also have to design how it should look a little bit, how it should function. There's a lot of prototyping people do out there before they actually get really into a project, just to make sure it kind of aligns with everything you're thinking of. So you'd want to basically have someone, probably a contractor at that point, kind of start creating a mock-up of UI, whether it is on Android, iOS, or desktop, web. People tend to start with web. There's different ideologies about that. There's like mobile first design, there's web first, basically. You'd kind of have to figure out what you want to accomplish with it, and move from there. You have to build out the designs, and then you actually have to find people who can build those designs, rather than just creating a mock-up of it. Building out a whole website is much more involved than creating a mock-up where you're just kind of placing different things in different places. You'd have to find contractors to do that, and you'd obviously have to find someone for iOS, someone for Android, someone for web, if you're wanting to go for all platforms and kind of capture as much of the audience as you can. Some people will limit it to, let's say, desktop first. It depends on your budget. It depends on what you want to do and how you want to approach that. If you have the budget, building it out on everything would be kind of the best scenario, because you will capture more users. You will get more engagement if they can, let's say, if they're on their computer and they can use desktop, and if they're on the go, they can sign in on their phone. You'll have a lot more people engaged with your app that way. But it really depends on budgeting. So you'd have to find front-end contractors, front-end meaning people who can build out UI, whether it's desktop or mobile. And then you'll have to find someone who can build out the database, someone who can basically send the data to those mobile applications or web applications, because that is how they get all their data.
Where do you start? Do you start with the data, or do you start with the front end?
I would say mock-ups for front end, and then you start with the data, because without the data, you're not going to be really able to build out the front end of it.
Got it. Well, I've learned a lot, believe it or not. So thank you for your time, Daniel. Appreciate you coming here.